I'm Eric Lipsy, and this is Galt University. Today, I'm here with our esteemed guest again, Amy Shield. How are you today, Amy?
I'm great, Eric. How are you?
Good, good. It's great to have you back on again. I know we were here a few weeks ago to talk about a different topic, but today we wanted to touch on fear of failure. So to get started, maybe we could talk a little bit about where the fear stems from.
Sure. In the simplest sense, fear is an emotion that is generated by a thought or belief that you have. And that's because our thoughts are what cause our emotions. Now, that being said, you have this kind of primitive part of your brain that is made up of the amygdala and a few other structures. And that primitive part of your brain, or I like to call it your toddler brain, because
Uh-huh.
that's kind of what it acts like as a toddler, has three distinctive jobs, and that is to keep you safe, maintain the status quo, and expend as little energy as possible doing number one and number two. And the thing about this primitive or toddler part of your brain is that, please pardon my cat,
That's
is
okay.
that it can't distinguish between um, something that poses a true imminent danger to your personal safety and well-being and something that really isn't going to hurt you, such as fear of failing at public speaking or fear of a failed launch of a new product, something like that. So from a neuroscientific standpoint, that is where fear originates in your brain.
Okay. And that's good to understand. I think it's really important when we talk about the brain because there's so much that we don't learn in school until maybe you get to college and you study psychology. They go more into in depth about how the brain works and the different segments of the brain and where fear is generated and how it works and how it causes your body to respond and different things like that. So I'm really glad you brought that point up to share with us because it's something that we're just not taught. And unless we've sought out that information at some point, we're just kind of left in the dark as far as that's concerned.
Right, exactly. Unfortunately, they don't teach this kind of brain management, cognitive emotional management in schools. I wish they taught it to everybody, but they don't. And I think that kind of along those same lines, so this primitive part of your brain, your toddler brain, like I said, it's designed to keep you safe, right? To mitigate risk as much as possible. And so what we tend to do when we are afraid of failing at something, whatever that might be, is we move away from the fear and toward comfort and familiarity,
Uh-huh.
right? But the issue with that, especially if the fear is around something that's not truly going to cause us harm, is that it pushes us away from growth. And a lot of times when you feel that fear, that means you're doing something right. It means you're taking risks, especially as a business owner. You are trying new things, you're putting something new out there. And yeah, that can certainly be scary. But I think that our brains are conditioned to move away from fear. And it's important to understand that fear can actually be a good thing, and it can be a good sign that you're growing, your
Yes.
business is growing.
Mhm. Yeah, I like how you said fear can be a good sign. It's like, fear can also, it can save you from problems. It can prevent you from, it can prevent you from living and it can, cause you to be able to live. So I guess it can kind of be on both sides of that, depending on how you're using it in your life. Yeah.
Exactly. And, I think when fear comes up, when fear of failing comes up, especially, um, one of the ways that you can approach this, whether it's as a business owner or even in your personal life, is what is the worst thing that could happen if I
Mhm.
fail at this?
Right.
And would I be able to handle that?
Mhm.
Um, because a lot of moving forward through fear has to do with your self-confidence and your ability to rely on yourself to take care of yourself, take care of your business, your family, regardless of what the outcome is. You succeed, you fail.
Right. Now, let's move a little bit more into the failure segment and talk about what it is, how we're viewing it, and how is it crippling us.
Sure. So failure can be crippling because of what we make it mean.
Mhm.
And a lot of that has to do with what you make failure mean about yourself. For example, I spoke briefly about if you had a failed launch of a new product or service. What are you making that failure mean about you as a person, about you as a business owner? And I think it's really important for us to separate our results from who we are as people, right? You're not your failures, you're also not your
Right.
successes,
Right.
and your results don't define you as a person. Every single one of us is whole, worthy, and complete exactly as we are, regardless of the results that we achieve in life. Um, and I think that we have kind of a tendency in our society to want to coach ourselves out of fear of failure, and that we should always just be excited and enthusiastic and gung-ho about doing all of these things in life. But the truth is that, as we discussed, fear is a very natural reaction to all kinds of circumstances that come up in our life, right? It's that toddler brain kicking in.
Mhm.
And so if you try to coach yourself out of being afraid of failing, you're really not honoring your true feelings. And a lot of times, if you ignore those feelings, they can kind of fester and bubble up in the back of your mind, cause you more stress, and affect your decision-making abilities, which we don't want. So I think it's important, first of all, just to acknowledge that, hey, I'm afraid of failing here,
Yes.
right? There's nothing wrong with that. And you can be afraid and still take action.
Yes. Yes. I yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking back on an experience that I had because, I've been in entrepreneurship for about 15, 16 years now. And over that time, I've had some things that did not work out so well. And, at eventually you start to develop this thought in the back of your head that every time you get ready to do something, it's like, oh, you remember what happened last time, right? It's like the past just keeps trying to come up in your head and you try to do those things to try to beat it, and I was just thinking as you were talking about something I had to start telling myself was that, you know what, no, the plan failed. Something, there was a flaw in the formula. I just need to fix the formula and get back to it. It wasn't me that failed, it was the plan that failed, and I get to keep moving on. I mean, who was it? Edison inventing the light bulb, right? I mean, how many times? How
Yeah,
many
over
times
over
did
a
he have to go back
thousand.
to the drawing board with the new formula to get before the light bulb worked? So,
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And when you said, that thought coming up in the back of your brain, oh, remember what happened last time, again, that is your brain's survival mechanism kicking in. And that part of your brain can't distinguish between you're being chased by a bear or you're putting a bunch of capital into, a new business venture.
mhm,
And so it's up to us as humans to use our prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that is responsible for future planning, future focus, rational thinking, to look at these situations and say, yes, I'm afraid here, but is this a situation where it would benefit me to move forward in the long run?
mhm. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing, is being able to use that rationale to say, is this something I need to push through, or is this something that's really trying to protect me from harm, as you earlier said, because it's easy to get caught up in to because I had somebody ask me, say, well, is fear a good thing or a bad thing? I was like, it's a tool, just like money, right? It's how you use it. It can keep you from living in it. It can also keep you alive.
Right.
So you just keep going back to that. And I like that you're saying that you have to basically put it in perspective so that you can move on and do what you need to do. Now, another thing that we might be able to talk on, since we're speaking about the fear and what's happening in the brain, is one of the things that would get me. And I know that's moving a little bit into the stress piece, because fear a failure. Even while you're doing the thing, you might decide to go ahead and do the thing, but that fear can start to wear on you if you're holding that in because it becomes a source of stress. And then it just starts to wear on you physically too. I don't know if we could touch a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a saying that good decisions aren't made from fear,
Mhm,
and that's absolutely true. Um, and something that I think is important to tie in here is that your emotional fuel matters.
mhm,
Um, and that is the reason why you are doing something. So you can take the exact same set of actions and be motivated by fear or be motivated by determination, and you're going to get different results because of the way that you show up when you take that action. The way you speak, the way you think, the way you carry yourself, the way you sell to a client, in those kinds of situations. And so it's okay to have the fear. Fear can come along for the ride, but fear shouldn't be driving the bus, to use an analogy, right?
mhm,
Um, you can be afraid and be determined. You can be
mhm,
afraid and be curious.
mhm,
And I think that a big part of not holding that stress in from your fear is, again, just acknowledging the emotion that you're experiencing. Um, there's something called buffering, and what buffering is it refers to an activity that we do to avoid feeling an emotion that we don't want to feel, such as
mhm.
fear.
Right.
So we can get really, really busy, be doing tons and tons of work in our business, um, to avoid feeling fear. What happens again when we leave that emotion unacknowledged in the background of our mind is it festers. A lot of times it gets worse. It
Yes.
grows and grows. And
Mhm.
so I think just acknowledging, hey, I'm scared here. I'm getting ready to launch a new program, and I'm afraid that, I'm not going to sign any clients for it, that kind of a thing. Just accept the fear, process it. And you can do that just by saying, okay, I'm afraid. Where do I feel this fear in my body? It's a fluttering in my chest, and my mind is racing a little bit. And I notice that my breaths are increasing. And so what that does is that makes fear just a physiological response in your body, right? And you can process that fear through. And, you probably will still have some fear in the background, but just allowing that emotion instead of trying to avoid it will go a long way toward alleviating stress from fear building up in the background of your mind as you try to maybe coach yourself out of it or busy yourself to distract yourself from it.
I guess you're making a clear point of why people hire coaches like yourself or life coaches to help them get through certain challenges and on their journey, because these things are very real. Even in this watered down example that I'm going to share is something that I dealt with playing golf, where I go through, get through the fifth hole, I've hit the fairway every time, and all of a sudden I get to this hole and there's water off to the right. Now all of a sudden, that's the only thing I can think about is that water off to the right. So what do? I hit the ball right into the water, even though I've hit the ball into the fairway all of these times. Now all of a sudden, my brain is gravitated and focused so much on that water that now it just gravitates that way. Where I line up right to the water, or whatever I hook or slice or whatever, it's going to the water, because now that's become my predominant thought of, I'm so engulfed with the thought of what I don't want to do that I do that exact thing.
Yep, that's exactly right. And there's kind of an adage that your energy flows where your focus goes.
Yes.
And in thought work, like I said earlier, our thoughts are what create our emotions. Well, our emotions are what create our actions, which is what produces our result. And so if your thought is, I don't want to hit my ball into the water, and you're worried or afraid, you're not going to be setting yourself up to concentrate on taking a great shot. And so it's not a surprise that your ball ends up in the water, right? Because your thought process almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm. Now, I want to touch a little bit more on what you were saying earlier about failure, because I know you were saying like you're afraid of a bear. You know, that's a legitimate fear, and your stress levels do go up for that. But that I was reading some psychology book. I can't remember which one it was, but they were talking about how uh, dealing with stress and of things, and how you basically got away from the saber-tooth tiger, or the saber-tooth tiger killed you. Either way, you weren't going to go on the rest of your life stressing and carrying on this weight with you that was being an hindrance to your health or your well-being, because it starts to just tear you apart. I don't know if you could touch a little bit more on that, but that was my understanding of it.
So that you either succeed, but you don't ruminate on it afterward. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, because basically they were saying that stress wasn't meant to stay with us for a long period of time, because it was fear based, right? So either you got away and you died, or that was the thing. So you got rid of the stress. The stressful situation was over, one way or the other. But when we try to live in this, because now we have these stressful situations and fear factors that we can live with on a day-to-day basis, so we carry this thing longer and longer and longer, sometimes throughout our lives, throughout for years, for months on end. And it has more of a chance to just wear us down physically, as opposed to like if it was just running away from a saber-tooth tiger, it would have been over fairly quickly.
Right. Okay, got it. Yeah, and I think a live view goes back to, remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mhm.
from high school biology class. We as a society, as human beings, have evolved to a point where we are, for most of us, our basic needs are met.
Mhm.
Not getting saber-tooth tigers, generally not an issue for us.
Yes.
And so now we are looking at things like acceptance by other people,
Mhm.
our self-image and our self-actualization, success, financial success, successful relationships. And so these are things that are in the periphery of our lives on a day-to-day basis. Whereas, as you said, the saber-tooth tiger, you got away, it was gone. That presentation that we have to deliver next week, and the month after, and the month after, those
Right.
things aren't going away. And so while our our brains have evolved kind of as a society, that primitive toddler part of your brain is still seeing these, for example, fear of public speaking, um, fear of having an argument with your spouse, having a big sales presentation that you're worried isn't going to go well.
Mhm.
The toddler brain is still sending off alarm bells about these things, because, as I said earlier, it can't distinguish between saber-tooth tiger,
Right.
intimidating customer.
Yes. And that's huge. I mean, it's a really big deal, like you said, because it's ongoing, and it's an ongoing thing. And if we can't let it go, it just wears us down. So now that we kind of made the case for fear of failure and dealing with failure, what are some tools that can maybe be used to help us to cope with, because these things, like you said, they don't go away, they're kind of around all the time. So being able to bring yourself back and focus on what you need to be focused on.
Sure. I think one of the important things, number one, is to just define what failure is. And
Mhm.
we all kind of know the Webster's dictionary definition of it. Not meeting a goal or not achieving a desired outcome. But failure is also data,
Mhm.
right? It gives you information. And so I think that doing simple exercise around a situation, like what went well, what didn't go well, what I want to do differently next time, that can help get your brain moving forward after a failure.
Yes.
And then in terms of dealing with fear of failure, I think that, again, being very intentional about what is that failure going to mean about you?
Mhm.
So, for example, with your golf swing,
Mhm.
you know, if you hit it into the water, that doesn't mean that Eric is a terrible human being. It just means
Right.
water, right?
Right.
Or, you know, somebody who is an entrepreneur and has had, you know, is starting up a new venture. If this venture fails, again, what are you going to make it mean about you? And I think that when you're fearing failure, it's a great opportunity to develop what we call self-confidence. Self-confidence is knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome is, I have the ability and I will take care of myself,
Mhm.
take care of my obligations, my family, um, but that I'm going to take care of myself in the way that I think about the outcome of any situation.
Yeah, that's great. I want to touch a little bit more on what you said about data, because I think there's a lot there. I think that's pretty loaded. And it's something even for me where I always try to look at why something works, why something didn't work, because I think we have to almost approach um, different ventures almost scientifically, right? Because if something's not working, there's usually a reason why. And when it doesn't work out, that gives you an opportunity to collect that data. And when it does work out, that's still additional data, learning why it worked out so you can do more of that thing and do less of the other thing. And just go back to the formula with that data to say, okay, I'm going to move B out of here. I'm going to move D out of here. I'm going to put J in here and see how it works this time. Because I think when we look at it like a scientific experiment, maybe that helps us to overcome that fear of failure in a better, more conducive manner, because now we're not so much looking at, oh man, it's the end of the world. It's like, oh no, I just figured out something that doesn't work anymore. So now I've narrowed that out, and now I'm going to try this different formula. So I think that's, yeah, that's a really good way to look at it with the data collection.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And how are you going to respond to failure? You
Mhm.
know, because so much of our fear around failure is, well, what does that mean for me? You
Mhm.
know, does that mean that I'm going to lose my business? Does that mean that, you know, I'm a bad coach or a bad financial advisor or whatever the case might be? And I think that, just as you said, getting scientific about it, separating, you know, your launch, your new product, whatever it is, from you as a person, and examining it kind of in its own compartment, is a great way to take care of yourself emotionally so that you can do that kind of an assessment and you can move forward, and so that there will be a next time,
Mhm.
and you don't let that failure or fear of failure stop you in your tracks.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I know for me, even I've gone through so many different times. Like I said, I know I keep going back to this, but I like to use myself as an example. Just being in those situations where you've had things not work out over and over and over again, but every time I can even think back to some of the things that I do now better because of the things that happened in the past where it was, oh, this didn't work because of this. This didn't work with it. It was, it was too convoluted. It was too complicated. So I simplify this, and then it's like, oh, okay, this time it didn't work out because it didn't have the right people involved. Okay, so I'm going to fix that now. And just going through that process, I guess it helped me deal with the failure and deal with my brain in a way that was more conducive to getting to where I want to be. And that's not to say, oh yeah, that's the last time I'm going to have to go back, because things are happening all the time, even with highly successful companies. People don't realize. I mean, look at Google Plus. Google Plus was a failure. That was $1 billion. It was $1 billion failure, and sometimes we're beating ourselves up about these little things, not realizing that some of these massive companies have the same sort of issues where they create something and think something's going to work a certain way. It doesn't, and they have to go back to the drawing board. So now they have Google My Business instead of Google Plus. But they go back to the drawing board, find something that's going to work better, and move forward with that. And my understanding is Google My Business is working a lot better than Google Plus did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And nobody's immune to failure. Um, a lot of times when we are kind of in our own heads, we kind of catastrophize and, oh, all the things that could happen if this doesn't go the way I want it to go. But that is something that every other human being on earth experiences.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to remember that if you're feeling afraid, if you're stressed out, that's normal and there's nothing wrong with you. And just like you said, huge companies like Google have billion-dollar failures of products and services. It happens all the time. And so for you as an individual, you get to decide what that means, and you get to decide the position that that fear has in your decision-making process, in your leadership, in your business, in your leadership with yourself.
That's very good information. Now, I know I've asked the questions that I had to ask on there, and it's been a great conversation. I know it's going to be very enlightening for anyone who watches this video is going to be enlightened to uh, know how to better deal with their failure. But I wanted to see if there's anything else that I might not have asked that you wanted to add.
Probably about the only thing I would say is that we've been talking, this entire time about fear of failure, and your brain is wired to look at what if this goes wrong. I think it's also important for people to look at, okay, but what if this goes right?
Yes,
And and
absolutely.
yeah, and I know exactly how I'm defining failure, but how am I defining success? And not only from a quantitative standpoint, like earnings per lead, conversion rates, gross sales, those kinds of things, but also, do I consider it a success if I'm done working by 4 p.m. every day and I can go pick up my daughter from school? If I cap my hours at 40 a week and I get fewer conversions, is that still a win for me? So I think taking a holistic approach to success and failure is probably one more thing that I would encourage your viewers to take into consideration.
That's a very good point that you bring up about the where your brain gravitates to. It seems like it's more natural for us to gravitate to the thought of what if it doesn't work, as opposed to what if it does. I don't know. It just seems like it's more of a natural. Maybe it's that protective thing, like you were saying earlier, where you're trying to protect yourself. So your brain doesn't go to initially thinking, oh yeah, but what if it does work out? It initially goes to what if it doesn't? For most people
Exactly.
that I've talked to anyways, their brain typically goes to the negative before, and then they have to work to get to the positive.
That's right. But that work is so, so worth it.
So worth it. Yeah. Well, that was a great, very good point to make before ending this for sure. Now, again, I know we mentioned this in a previous video, but I also want to extend the offer here for you to let people know how they can get in touch with you for your coaching services. Obviously, you know your stuff, you know what you're doing, and you can help guide them through their life's journey. So have at it.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. So people can find me at amyschield.com, and it's Shield with a C, SCHIELD. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram under @AmyShield Coaching.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on with us. I know it was kind of a short notice and you jumped right in and filled this spot in. I really appreciate that.
It was my pleasure, Eric. And thank you again for inviting me to come back and speak to the Galt University viewers once again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Until next time, this is Galt University.